Jin-ho sat by the window of his family's house, watching the two suns of New Seoul slowly set behind the purple mountains. The 12-year-old boy was supposed to be doing his homework, but the math problems seemed boring compared to the beautiful, alien sunset. His parents had moved to this colony world when he was 5, and he loved everything about their new home. "Jin-ho, dinner is ready," his mother So-jin called from the kitchen. She was an engineer who helped design the colony's water systems. His father Tae-min studied the strange plants and animals on New Seoul. Both of his parents were smart people, who taught Jin-ho to ask questions about everything. The family sat down to eat rice and vegetables grown in their own garden. New Seoul was famous across human space for growing the best food. The soil here was rich, and the long days helped crops grow big and healthy. Jin-ho's parents often said they were lucky to live in such a peaceful place. "How was school today?" Tae-min asked, cutting a piece of the local fruit that tasted like apples but was bright blue inside. "We learned about Earth history," Jin-ho said. "Mrs. Park told us about the old wars and how humans finally learned to work together. She said that's why we could build colonies like this one." So-jin smiled at her son. "Your teacher is right. Humans are good at solving problems when we work together." As they ate, Jin-ho noticed something strange outside. A bright light was moving across the sky, too slow to be a shooting star, but too fast to be one of the colony ships. He pointed it out to his parents. Tae-min looked worried. "That's not one of our ships. It's too big and moving wrong." The light grew brighter and bigger. Soon they could see it wasn't just one ship, but many ships flying in formation. The ships were huge, bigger than anything humans had ever built. They were dark and smooth, with no windows or lights except for a strange, blue glow underneath. "We need to get to the emergency shelter," So-jin said, standing up quickly. All colony families had been taught what to do if unknown ships appeared. The shelter was built into the hillside behind their house. But before they could move, the air around them began to shimmer like heat waves. Jin-ho felt dizzy and his vision became blurry. He tried to call out to his parents, but his voice wouldn't work. The last thing he saw was his mother reaching for him before everything went dark. Jin-ho woke up in a place that was nothing like home. The walls were smooth and white, and they glowed with soft light. The air smelled clean but wrong, like a hospital but different. He was lying on something that felt like a bed but was harder than any bed he had ever slept on. He sat up and looked around. He was in a small room with no windows and only one door. The door had no handle that he could see. Everything was quiet, except for a soft humming sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Jin-ho stood up and walked to the door. When he got close, it opened by itself with a soft whoosh sound. Outside was a long hallway with the same glowing walls. Other doors lined the hallway, and he could hear voices coming from some of the rooms. Human voices. "Hello?" he called out. "Is anyone there?" A door across the hall opened, and a woman came out. She was older than his mother, with gray hair and kind eyes, but she looked scared. "Oh, thank goodness, another person," the woman said. "Are you hurt? Do you know where we are?" "I think I'm okay," Jin-ho said. "I was at home with my parents, and then there were strange ships, and then I woke up here." "Where are my parents?" The woman's face became sad. "I don't know, child. I was taken from my home, too. My name is Dr. Hae-won. I study games and how people think. What's your name?" "Jin-ho. My parents are Tae-min and So-jin. They work for the colony." More doors opened, and other people came out. Jin-ho saw men and women of different ages, but no other children. Everyone looked confused and scared. They all had the same story. They were taken from their homes by the strange ships. Dr. Hae-won seemed to be the smartest person there, so others gathered around her. "We need to figure out where we are and who took us," she said. "Does anyone remember anything about the ships or the beings who took us?" A tall man named Captain Bowraw spoke up. I was in the colony's defense center when it happened. The ships appeared out of nowhere. Our scanners couldn't detect them until they were already in orbit. Then some kind of energy beam hit us, and everyone just fell asleep. Jin-Ho listened to the adults talk, but he was also paying attention to other things. The walls felt warm when he touched them. The humming sound changed pitch sometimes. The air moved in a way that suggested there were hidden vents. Everything about this place was designed by beings who thought very differently from humans. Suddenly, the humming stopped. The hallway became very quiet. Then they heard footsteps, but they sounded wrong. They were too light and too rhythmic, like a machine walking. 3 beings came around the corner of the hallway. They were taller than humans, with long arms and legs. Their skin was gray and smooth, and their heads were bigger than human heads. They had large black eyes that seemed to look right through people. They wore simple clothes that seemed to be made of the same material as the walls. The beings stopped in front of the group of humans. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, made sounds that might have been speech, but it sounded like musical notes mixed with clicking noises. Then, to everyone's surprise, a voice came from the air around them. It spoke in perfect human language. Greetings, specimens. You have been collected for study and evaluation. You will not be harmed if you cooperate. Resistance is not recommended and will not be successful. Dr. Haywan stepped forward. Who are you? Why have you taken us from our homes? The leader being made more musical sounds, and the voice in the air answered. We are the Vextar. We have traveled the galaxy for thousands of your years, studying the species we encounter. Your species shows some interesting characteristics that require further investigation. We're not specimens, Captain Bowraw said angrily. We're people with families and homes. You have no right to take us. The being that was speaking tilted its large head. Rights are a concept for equals. You are a young species with limited development. We study you as you might study insects or small animals. Jin-Ho felt anger rise in his chest. These beings thought humans were just animals to be studied. But he also felt something else. Curiosity. These aliens were clearly very advanced, but they seemed to think in very simple ways about other species. That might be important to remember. The leader being looked directly at Jin-Ho. Its large black eyes seemed to see everything about him. You are a juvenile specimen. Interesting. You will be evaluated separately. Follow. Before Jin-Ho could say anything, the same shimmer that had taken him from home surrounded him again. The last thing he saw was Dr. Haywan reaching out toward him, just like his mother had done. Then everything went dark again. When Jin-Ho woke up this time, he was in a different room. This one was bigger and had strange objects floating in the air. Lights moved in patterns on the walls, and he could hear different sounds. Some like music, some like voices, some like machines. He was no longer just a captive. He was about to become something much more important, though he didn't know it yet. He was about to become the key to humanity's survival. Jin-Ho stood in the center of the strange room, trying not to show how scared he was. The floating objects moved around him in slow circles, making soft beeping sounds. Some looked like crystals, others like metal shapes he had never seen before. The walls showed moving pictures of stars and planets, but they moved too fast for him to understand what he was seeing. 3 Vextar entered the room. They were different from the ones he had seen before. These wore clothes with colored patterns, and they carried objects that might have been tools or computers. The one in the middle was taller than the others and wore more colors. Juvenile human specimen, the voice came from the air again. You will now undergo evaluation. Your responses will determine your classification and treatment. My name is Jin-Ho, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm not a specimen. I'm a person. The tall Vextar made those musical clicking sounds, and the voice translated. High Evaluator Nexrim acknowledges your preference for individual designation. However, personal identity is irrelevant to scientific study. You will be given tests to measure your cognitive abilities. One of the floating objects moved closer to Jin-Ho. It projected a beam of light that created pictures in the air. The first picture showed simple shapes, circles, squares, triangles. Then the shapes began to change and move. "Identify the pattern," the voice said. Jin-Ho watched carefully. The shapes were changing color and size in a specific order. Red circle, blue square, green triangle. Then red square, blue triangle, green circle. The pattern was that each shape changed to the next shape in line, and each color moved to the next color. It was like a puzzle his father had taught him. "The next one should be a red triangle," Jin-Ho said. The light projection showed a red triangle. The Vextar made more sounds to each other. "Correct. Next test." The tests got harder. Jin-Ho had to solve math problems, remember long lists of words, and figure out how to make complicated machines work. Some tests were about pictures and patterns. Others were about logic and reasoning. Jin-Ho did well on most of them, but he was careful not to do too well. Something told him it would be bad if these aliens thought he was too smart. High Evaluator Nexrim watched Jin-Ho take each test. The alien's large black eyes never blinked, and Jin-Ho felt like he was being studied like a bug under a microscope. But Jin-Ho was studying too. He watched how the Vextar moved, how they communicated, how their technology worked. The Vextar seemed very organized. Everything they did followed specific patterns. When they talked to each other, it was always in the same order. The highest-ranking one spoke first, then the others. When they operated their floating machines, they always touched them in the same sequence. They were clearly very smart, but they seemed to think in very straight lines. After 2 hours of testing, High Evaluator Nexrim made a long series of musical sounds. The voice in the air translated. This juvenile specimen shows cognitive abilities above average for its species. Its pattern recognition and logical reasoning scores are particularly high for such a young organism. Recommendation: place in advanced study program for continued evaluation. "What does that mean?" Jin-Ho asked. "You will be given more complex tests and challenges. Your responses will help us understand the potential and limitations of human intelligence. This is an honor. Most specimens are processed much more quickly." Jin-Ho didn't think being studied like a lab animal was an honor, but he nodded. "Will I see the other humans? Are they okay?" "Other specimens are being processed according to their classifications. Your concern for other members of your species is noted as an interesting behavioral trait." The way the alien said it made Jin-Ho realize that the Vextar didn't understand things like caring about other people. That seemed like important information. 2 smaller Vextar entered the room. They wore simpler clothes and carried different tools. High Evaluator Nexrim made sounds to them, and they approached Jin-Ho. "You will be taken to advanced study quarters. Technician Kelvin will be your primary observer." One of the smaller aliens stepped forward. When it spoke, its translation sounded younger than the others. "Human Jin-Ho, I am Kelvin. I will monitor your tests and provide for your basic needs. Do you require anything for survival?" Jin-Ho thought for a moment. "I need food and water, and I would like to know that my parents are safe." Kelvin made questioning sounds to High Evaluator Nexrim. The larger alien responded with what sounded like annoyance. "Your parental units are being held with other adult specimens. They are unharmed. Food and water will be provided according to your species' requirements." Jin-Ho was led through long hallways that all looked the same. The walls glowed with soft light, and the floors felt warm under his feet. He saw other Vextar moving through the corridors, always walking in straight lines, always moving with purpose. They all seemed very busy, but Jin-Ho noticed they never seemed to talk to each other casually like humans did. His new room was bigger than the first one. It had a bed-like surface, a small table, and what looked like a bathroom area behind a glowing wall. There were also several of the floating machines, but these ones looked different. "These are learning devices," Kelvin explained. "They will teach you about Vextar history and culture so you can better understand the tests you will be given." "Why do you want to teach me about your people?" Jinho asked. Kelvin tilted its head in what might have been confusion. "Knowledge improves test performance. Better test performance provides better data. Better data improves our understanding of your species." Again, Jinho noticed how the Vextar thought. Everything was about collecting information and organizing it. They seemed to have trouble understanding that other beings might think differently than they did. When Kelvin left, Jinho was alone with the floating learning machines. They projected images and sounds that told him about the Vextar civilization. What he learned was both impressive and frightening. The Vextar had been traveling through space for over 10,000 years. They had studied hundreds of different alien species. Some of those species had been deemed useful and were kept as workers or soldiers. Others had been classified as irrelevant and were left alone. A few had been marked as problematic and had simply disappeared from the galaxy. The Vextar believed they were the most intelligent species in the galaxy. Their technology was incredibly advanced. Their ships could travel faster than light and could move through space in ways that human science said was impossible. They had weapons that could destroy entire planets and computers that could think faster than millions of human brains working together. But as Jinho learned about them, he began to see something that the Vextar couldn't see about themselves. They were smart, but they were smart in only one way. They were excellent at logic and organization and building complicated things. But they seemed to have no imagination. They always did things the same way they had always done them. They never seemed to play or joke or create art just for fun. Most importantly, they always assumed that other species would think the same way they did. When they met a new species, they tested its intelligence by giving it Vextar-style problems. If the species couldn't solve Vextar puzzles, the Vextar decided it wasn't very smart. Jinho realized that humans thought very differently from the Vextar. Humans were good at seeing problems from different angles, at finding creative solutions, at working together in ways that didn't follow strict rules. But the Vextar couldn't understand this kind of thinking because they had never seen it before. As he lay on the hard bed that night, Jinho began to form a plan. It was a crazy plan that probably wouldn't work, but it was the kind of plan that only a human would think of, which meant the Vextar would never see it coming. He just had to be very, very careful. If the Vextar realized what he was really thinking, they would stop treating him like an interesting specimen and start treating him like a threat. And Jinho had already learned enough about the Vextar to know that they dealt with threats very permanently. But if his plan worked, it might not just save him. It might save all the humans on this ship, and maybe even save humanity itself from becoming just another species in the Vextar's collection. Jinho had been in the advanced study program for 5 days. Each day brought new tests that were harder than the ones before. The Vextar seemed pleased with his progress, but Jinho was more interested in what he was learning about them. Technician. Kelvin came to his room every morning to escort him to the testing chambers. Unlike the other Vextar, Kelvin seemed curious about things beyond just collecting data. During their walks through the ship's corridors, the young alien would ask Jinho questions that weren't part of any official test. "Human Jinho," Kelvin said as they walked toward the testing area. "Yesterday you solved the spatial reasoning puzzle in a way our computers did not predict. How did you reach that solution?" Jinho had been waiting for this kind of question. "I imagined I was looking at it from underneath instead of from above. Sometimes when you can't solve something one way, you try looking at it differently." Kelvin stopped walking. "You imagined a perspective that did not exist in the problem. Parameters?" "Yes. My father taught me that when I can't understand something, I should try to think about it like I'm a different person, or looking from a different place, or even pretending I'm very small or very big." The alien's large eyes seemed to grow even larger. "This is unusual, Vextar problem-solving follows established logical pathways. We do not typically employ perspective alteration. Jinho realized he had just learned something very important. The Vextar were smart, but they thought in very fixed ways. They couldn't imagine being anything other than what they were, or seeing. Problems from any angle other than their own. "How do your people learn new things?" Jinho asked. "We analyze data, identify patterns, and construct logical frameworks. New information is integrated into existing knowledge structures. But what if the new information doesn't fit into the old structures?" Kelvin was quiet for a long moment. "That situation does not commonly arise. The Vextar knowledge base is comprehensive and well-organized." Jinho smiled. "But you're studying humans because we do things you don't understand, right? So we must be new information that doesn't fit." The alien made several rapid clicking, sounds that weren't translated. Jinho got the feeling that Kelvin was thinking about something that troubled it. In the testing chamber, Jinho faced new challenges that were designed to push his abilities to their limits. Today's test involved controlling multiple machines at the same time while solving math problems and remembering long lists of words. It was hard, but Jinho had been practicing something the Vextar didn't know about while he worked on the official tasks. Part of his mind was mapping the ship. Every room he visited, every corridor he walked through, every Vexitar he met. He was building a mental picture of how everything connected. He was also listening to the background sounds of the ship, learning to recognize different types of machinery and activity. The ship was enormous. Jinho estimated it was at least 50 times bigger than the largest human colony ship, but size wasn't what impressed him most. What amazed him was how organized everything was. Every Vextar he saw was doing a specific job in a specific way. Every machine operated according to exact schedules. Every corridor was laid out in perfect geometric patterns. It was like the ship was one giant machine, and every Vextar was a part of that machine. They were incredibly efficient, but Jinho was beginning to understand that efficiency could also be a weakness. After the morning tests, Kelvin took Jinho to a new part of the ship. "High Evaluator Nexrim wishes you to observe standard specimen processing. This will help you understand your privileged position in the advanced study program." They entered a large chamber with transparent walls. Through the walls, Jinho could see other humans being put through various procedures. Some were being tested like he was, but their tests looked simpler and shorter. Others were being measured and scanned by machines. A few were sitting in chairs that had wires connected to their heads. "What are they doing to those people?" Jinho asked, trying to keep his voice calm. "Standard evaluation and classification. Most human specimens show limited cognitive abilities. They are being prepared for appropriate assignments." "What kind of assignments?" "Manual labor, basic maintenance, simple manufacturing tasks. Some show aptitude for more complex work and will receive additional training." Jinho felt sick to his stomach. The Vextar were turning people into slaves, but he couldn't let his anger show. Instead, he asked more questions. "What happens to humans who don't do well on any of the tests?" Kelvin hesitated. "They are classified as non-productive and are recycled." Jinho didn't ask what recycled meant. He was pretty sure he didn't want to know. "How many humans are on this ship?" "Currently, approximately 800 specimens from various collection sites. 800 people." Jinho's mind raced. If this was just one ship, how many other ships were out there collecting humans? How many people had already been taken? Are there other ships like this one? The Vextar fleet consists of 47 collection vessels and one command ship. This vessel is among the smaller ones. Jinho's heart sank. If this ship was one of the smaller ones and it held 800 people, the Vextar might have taken tens of thousands of humans. Maybe more. "Kelvin," Jinho said carefully, "how does your people decide which species get studied and which ones get left alone?" Species are evaluated based on their technological development, social organization, and cognitive capabilities. Those that show potential for useful service are collected. Those that demonstrate advanced capabilities are studied more extensively. And those that are too advanced? Another pause. Species that pose potential threats to Vextar supremacy are subject to containment protocols. Jin-Ho was beginning to understand how the Vextar controlled the galaxy. They were like cosmic farmers, harvesting species that could be useful and destroying those that might become competition. The only way to survive was to be useful, but not threatening. But there was something the Vextar didn't understand about humans. They were judging human intelligence by Vextar standards, which meant they were missing the kinds of thinking that made humans really dangerous to them. That afternoon, Jin-Ho was given a new type of test. Instead of solving puzzles by himself, he was put in a room with 3 other humans and given problems to solve as a group. The other humans were adults who had been classified as above average, but not advanced enough for individual study. One was Dr. Hei Wan, the woman he had met on his first day. Another was Captain Bo-Ra, the military officer. The third was a young woman named Min Jung, who had been a computer programmer on her colony world. "Jin-Ho," Dr. Hei Wan said when she saw him. "Are you all right? We've been worried about you." "I'm okay," Jin-Ho said, looking around for listening devices. He was sure the Vextar were recording everything, but he needed to share information with the other humans. "They've been testing me a lot. What about you?" "They have us doing group problem-solving exercises," Captain Bo-Ra said. "Trying to understand how humans work together, I think." Jin-Ho nodded. Then he did something that looked like he was just fidgeting, but was actually much more. He started tapping his fingers on the table in a pattern. Short taps and long taps that spelled out letters in an old code his grandfather had taught him. Dr. Hei Wan noticed first. She was a smart woman who studied games and puzzles for a living. She tapped back a question. "What are you doing?" Jin-Ho tapped out. "They are listening, but they don't know this code." One by one, the other adults caught on. Soon all 4 of them were having 2 conversations. One out loud about the test problems they were supposed to solve, and one in code about the information they had gathered. Through the coded conversation, Jin-Ho learned that the adults had figured out much of what he had discovered. They knew about the classification system, the slave labor assignments, and the threat to humanity. But they had also learned something he hadn't. There is a ship rule. Min Jung tapped out. Ancient law. Any species can challenge them to something, called Great Convergence. Jin-Ho's pulse quickened. "What is that?" "Contest of intelligence. If challenger wins, their species goes free. If they lose, species becomes permanent servants. Has anyone ever won? No. No species has ever even tried." Jin-Ho thought about this as they worked on the official test problems. A contest of intelligence. Against the Vextar seemed impossible. They were thousands of years more advanced than humans. Their technology was beyond anything humans could imagine. Their logical thinking abilities were clearly superior. But as the day went on, Jin-Ho kept coming back to something Kelvin had said. The Vextar solved problems by following established logical pathways. They didn't employ perspective alteration. They couldn't imagine being anything other than what they were. Maybe, just maybe, that was enough of a weakness for a human to exploit, especially a human they underestimated because he was just a child. When the testing day ended and Jin-Ho was back in his room, he began to plan in earnest. He would challenge the Vextar to their great convergence. It was probably suicide, but it was better than watching his species become slaves. The only question was whether a 12-year-old boy could find a way to beat beings who had dominated the galaxy for 10,000 years. Jin-Ho spent 3 days preparing for what he was about to do. He studied every piece of information the learning machines had shown him about Vextar law and tradition. He practiced the formal phrases he would need to use. Most importantly, he tried to understand exactly what he was getting himself into. The Great Convergence was ancient, older than the Vextar's space-traveling civilization. It came from a time when different Vextar tribes would settle disputes through contests of intelligence rather than warfare. When the Vextar began exploring the galaxy, they extended this tradition to other species as a way of proving their superiority. The rules were simple but strict. Any sapient being could invoke the Great Convergence if they believed their species was being treated unfairly. The challenger would face 5 tests of intelligence against the Vextar's greatest minds. Win even one test, and the challenger's species would be granted protected status and freedom. Lose all 5 tests, and the species would accept permanent servitude to the Vextar. In 10,000 years of galactic exploration, no species had ever been brave enough or foolish enough to issue this challenge. The Vextar had made sure that every species they encountered understood the consequences of failure. But Jin-Ho had noticed something important in the historical records. The Great Convergence could be invoked by any member of a species, regardless of age or status. The Vextar had probably never imagined that a child would be the one to challenge them. On the 4th day, Jin-Ho told Kelvin that he wanted to speak with High Evaluator Nexrim. For what purpose? The young technician asked. I have a request that I believe falls under ancient Vextar law. Kelvin's large eyes widened. What law do you reference? The right of any sapient being to invoke the Great Convergence. The technician made several rapid clicking sounds that the translator didn't convert. Jin-Ho was pretty sure they were expressions of shock or alarm. Human Jin-Ho, you do not understand what you are suggesting. The Great Convergence is not a simple test. It is a sacred ritual that determines the fate of entire species. I understand perfectly, Jin-Ho said. I invoke the Great Convergence on behalf of humanity. Kelvin stared at him for a long moment. Then the alien turned and left the room without another word. Jin-Ho waited, trying to stay calm, while his heart pounded in his chest. 2 hours later, the door opened and 4 Vextar entered. High Evaluator Nexrim was in the lead, followed by 3 others wearing ceremonial robes that Jin-Ho had seen only in the historical recordings. Their clothes were covered with symbols that represented different aspects of Vextar law and tradition. High Evaluator Nexrim spoke, and for the first time, his words were translated with a tone of surprise and uncertainty. Juvenile human specimen. Jin-Ho, Technician Kelvin reports that you have invoked the Great Convergence. This is unprecedented. Are you certain you understand the implications of this action? Jin-Ho stood as straight as he could and spoke in the formal phrases he had memorized. High Evaluator Nexrim, I am Jin-Ho of the human species. I invoke the ancient right of the Great Convergence. I challenge the wisdom of the Vextar and demand that my species be judged by contest rather than by assumption. The 3 robed Vextar began making rapid musical sounds to each other. Their conversation went on for several minutes, and none of it was translated. Finally, High Evaluator Nexrim responded. The laws of our ancestors cannot be denied. However, you are a juvenile. By what right do you speak for your species? Jin-Ho had expected this question. By the right of any sapient being to represent their species in extremity. I am human. I possess the intelligence and reasoning ability that defines my species. I am old enough to understand the consequences of my actions. Under Vextar law, that is sufficient. More rapid musical discussion. Jin-Ho could tell that the Vextar were looking through their legal databases, trying to find a way to refuse his challenge. But eventually, High Evaluator Nexrim spoke again. The challenge is acknowledged. However, we must verify that you truly understand what you are proposing. If you succeed in even one test of the Great Convergence, all humans currently held by the Vextar will be released, and your species will be granted protected status. You will be free to develop your civilization without interference. I understand. If you fail all 5 tests, humanity will accept the status of permanent servants to the Vextar. Your species will work for us until the end of time. There will be no freedom, no independence, no hope of appeal. Jinho's mouth felt dry, but he kept his voice steady. I understand. The Great Convergence will take place in 3 days. You will face our 5 greatest minds in contests of pure intelligence. The tests will be fair but extraordinarily difficult. You will compete as an equal, with no allowances made for your age or species. That's all I ask. The robed Vextar left, but High Evaluator Nexrim remained behind with Kelvin. Jinho, the High Evaluator said, using his name for the first time. I do not understand why you have done this. Your performance in the advanced study program shows promise. You could have earned a privileged position among your people when they are assigned to work duties. Why risk everything for a challenge you cannot win? Jinho looked directly into the alien's large black eyes. Because humans don't accept being told what we can and can't do, and because sometimes the only way to prove you're not a pet is to bite the hand that's trying to put a collar on you. High Evaluator. Nexrim tilted his head in the gesture Jinho had learned meant confusion. Your metaphor is unclear. Explain. You'll understand after the Great Convergence. When the aliens left, Jinho was alone with his thoughts and his fears. He had just committed his entire species to a contest he probably couldn't win. If he failed, humanity would become slaves forever. Children would be born into captivity and never know what freedom meant. But if he did nothing, humanity would become slaves anyway. At least this way they had a chance. That evening, Kelvin came to his room. The young technician seemed upset about something. Jinho, I have been assigned to help you prepare for the Great Convergence. But I must tell you honestly, no human can succeed in this challenge. The minds you will face are the greatest intellects in Vextar civilization. Each has spent hundreds of years perfecting their specific area of knowledge. Tell me about them, Jinho said. Kelvin activated one of the floating display machines. Images appeared in the air showing 5 different Vextar. Grand Strategist Velmoth has mastered every form of tactical and strategic thinking. She has never lost a game of any kind. Master Logician Kexdar can solve mathematical proofs that would take your human computers years to process. Mind Reader. Texlin can perceive thoughts and predict actions with perfect accuracy. Chief Engineer Rex Mull designs technology beyond your species' ability to understand. And High Evaluator Nexrim himself has integrated knowledge from thousands of worlds and species. Jinho studied each face, trying to understand what kind of minds he would be facing. They all looked confident and supremely intelligent, but they also all looked exactly the same in one important way. They all had the same expression of certainty, the same assumption that their way of thinking was the only correct way. Kelvin, Jinho said, can I ask you something personal? Technician seemed surprised by the question. Personal? This is an unusual concept to apply to information sharing. Have you ever been wrong about something? Have you ever thought you understood something perfectly and then discovered you were completely mistaken? Kelvin was quiet for a long time. This is not a common experience for Vextar. Our methods of analysis are designed to prevent error. But it has happened to you. Once, when I first began studying human behavior, I predicted that humans would respond to captivity with logical acceptance of their situation. Instead, many humans showed emotional distress that seemed to serve no functional purpose. I had to revise my understanding of human psychology. Jinho smiled. What if I told you that emotional distress does serve a functional purpose? What if I told you that being upset about being captured is actually a sign of intelligence, not a lack of it? I do not understand. Being upset means we can imagine a better situation than the one we're in. It means we can remember freedom and want it back. It means we don't just accept whatever happens to us. That's what makes humans dangerous to anyone who tries to control us. Kelvin stared at him. You are suggesting that what we interpreted as psychological weakness is actually a form of strength. Now you're starting to think like a human. That night, Jin-Ho lay on his hard bed and tried to plan for each of the 5 challenges he would face. He couldn't out-calculate Master Logician Kexdar or out-strategize Grand Strategist Velmoth using their own methods. But maybe he could find ways to win that they would never expect. The key was to remember that the Vextar always thought in straight lines. They expected every problem to have one correct solution that could be found through logical analysis. But humans knew that some problems had many solutions, and sometimes the best solution was one that nobody had thought of before. Jin-Ho had 3 days to figure out how to be more clever than beings who had dominated the galaxy for 10,000 years. It seemed impossible. But impossible things were what humans did best. Jin-Ho spent his 3 days of preparation learning everything he could about his opponents and the types of challenges he would face. But more importantly, he spent time talking to other humans whenever he could manage it. The Vextar had decided that Jin-Ho should be allowed to interact with other members of his species as part of his preparation. They thought this would help him understand what he was fighting for. They didn't realize that it would also help him learn things that no individual human could figure out alone. During the group sessions, Jin-Ho continued using the tapping code to communicate secretly with Dr. Hei-Wan, Captain Bora, and Min-Jung. Through these conversations, he learned about each of their areas of expertise and began to understand how human thinking worked differently from Vextar thinking. Dr. Hei-Wan taught him about game theory, the study of how to make decisions when your success depends on what other people choose to do. The most important thing to remember, she tapped out, is that the best strategy depends on who you're playing against. If you know how someone thinks, you can predict what they'll do. Captain Bora shared military strategy concepts. When you're outnumbered and outgunned, you don't fight fair. You use surprise, misdirection, and psychological warfare. Make your enemy fight the battle you want to fight, not the battle they're prepared for. Min-Jung explained how computer programming worked. Computers are very powerful, but they can only do exactly what they're programmed to do. If you can find a bug in the program or an input the programmer didn't expect, you can make the computer do things it was never supposed to do. All of this information gave Jin-Ho ideas, but he knew he would have to adapt them to work against minds that were far more advanced than any human opponent these adults had ever faced. On the 2nd day of preparation, Kelvin brought Jin-Ho something unexpected: access to the Vextar's own strategic databases. High Evaluator Nexrim decided that you should understand the full scope of what you are attempting. These records show how previous Great Convergence challenges were structured. Jin-Ho spent hours studying the records, even though they were depressing. The Vextar had used the Great Convergence only a few times in their history, always against species that had shown unusual intelligence or creativity. In every case, the challenger had been completely defeated. But as Jin-Ho read the records more carefully, he began to notice something interesting. The Vextar had always won, but they had won by using the same types of tests and the same strategies, every time. They were so confident in their methods that they never changed their approach. That gave Jin-Ho an idea. What if he could make them think he was going to fail in the same ways all the previous challengers had failed? What if he could lull them into overconfidence and then surprise them with approaches they had never seen before? On the 3rd day, Jin-Ho asked to see the arena where the Great Convergence would take place. Kelvin led him to an enormous chamber in the center of the ship. It was circular, with a platform in the middle where the challenger would face each opponent. Around the platform were thousands of seats where Vextar could watch the contests. The entire ship's population will observe, Kelvin explained. The Great Convergence will also be broadcast to the other ships in the fleet. This is a historic event. Jinho looked around the arena and felt a cold feeling in his stomach. Tomorrow he would stand in the center of this room and either save his species or doom them forever. Thousands of aliens would watch him try to do something that had never been done before. "Kelvin," he said, "why are you helping me prepare? Aren't you supposed to want your people to win?" The young technician was quiet for a moment. "I am supposed to gather data about human behavior under extreme stress. Helping you prepare provides more interesting data than simply watching you fail immediately. Is that the only reason?" Another pause. "I have observed that humans do things for reasons. Other than logical benefit, you call these reasons emotions. I am beginning to understand that emotions might serve functions that pure logic cannot." "What do you mean?" "You are facing certain defeat to protect other humans who cannot protect themselves. This behavior serves no benefit to you personally, but it demonstrates something about human nature that I find compelling." Jinho realized that he might have made an unexpected ally. "Kelvin, can I trust you with something important?" "Define important." "Something that could change the outcome of tomorrow's contest." The alien stared at him with those large black eyes. "You are planning something beyond simple preparation. I'm planning to win. But I need to know. If I tell you how I'm going to try to do it, will you report it to High Evaluator Nexarim?" Kelvin was quiet for a long time. Finally, the Wei alien spoke. "My assignment is to observe and record human behavior. I am not required to report strategic plans unless specifically asked. And if you're asked directly, I will not lie to my superiors. But Vextar communication is very precise. If they do not ask the exact right questions, I am not obligated to volunteer information." Jinho smiled. Kelvin was finding a way to help him without technically breaking any Vextar rules. It was a very human way of thinking. That evening, Jinho explained his plan to Kelvin. The alien listened without interruption, occasionally making small clicking sounds that the translator indicated were expressions of surprise. When Jinho finished, Kelvin said, "This strategy violates numerous assumptions about proper contest behavior. The High Evaluator and the 5 champions will not expect these approaches." "That's the idea. However, I must point out that your plan has several potential failure points. If the champions adapt more quickly than you anticipate, or if they recognize what you are doing, they may counter your strategies." "I know, but it's better than trying to beat them at their own game. There is another risk. If the Vextar High Council believes you have achieved victory through deception rather than superior intelligence, they may declare the contest invalid." Jinho had thought about this too. The rules of the Great Convergence say the challenger must demonstrate intelligence superior to the champions. They don't specify what kind of intelligence or what methods can be used. This is true. However, Vextar interpretation of law tends to favor Vextar interests. Then I'll have to win so clearly that they can't argue about it. The night before, the Great Convergence, Jinho couldn't sleep. He went over his plans again and again, trying to think of everything that could go wrong. There were so many variables, so many ways his strategies could fail. But as he lay in the dark, he thought about something his father had once told him. "Jinho, humans have survived and spread across the galaxy not because we're the strongest or the smartest, but because we're the most adaptable. When we can't overcome a problem with force or logic, we find a different way around it. Tomorrow, Jinho would try to find a different way around problems that had defeated every other species in the galaxy. He would use the one advantage humans had that the Vextar couldn't understand or copy, the ability to think in ways that broke all the rules." As he finally drifted off to sleep, Jinho whispered a promise to himself. and to all the humans counting on him. He would not just compete in the Great Convergence. He would win it, and if he did, he would prove to the galaxy that humans were not a species to be collected and controlled. They were a species to be respected, feared, and left alone, to find their own path among the stars. The most important day in human history was about to begin. The day of the Great Convergence arrived with a deep humming sound that Jin-Ho had never heard before. Kelvin explained that it was the ship's ceremonial systems activating, something that happened only for the most important events in Vextar: culture. Jin-Ho was brought to a preparation chamber where he was given formal clothing, a simple white robe that marked him as a challenger. As he put it on, his hands shook slightly, but his mind felt clear and focused. "Are you prepared?" Kelvin asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," Jin-Ho replied. They walked through corridors filled with Vextar heading toward the arena. Jin-Ho had never seen so many of the aliens in one place. They moved in organized groups, their conversations a constant musical humming that filled the air. Many of them stared at Jin-Ho as he passed, their large black eyes showing what might have been curiosity or amusement. When they reached the arena, Jin-Ho was amazed by how many Vextar had gathered to watch. Every seat was filled, and the aliens sat in perfect geometric patterns. The chamber was silent except for the soft background hum of the ship's systems. In the center of the arena was a circular platform with 5 stations arranged around it. Each station contained different equipment and displays. At the very center was a simple chair where Jin-Ho would sit between challenges. High Evaluator. Nexrim stood at the edge of the platform, wearing ceremonial robes covered with symbols representing Vextar law and tradition. Around him were the 5 champions Jin-Ho would face, each dressed in robes that indicated their area of expertise. Challenger Jin-Ho of the human species, High Evaluator Nexrim announced, his voice amplified throughout. "The arena. You have invoked the ancient rite of the Great Convergence. Do you understand that this contest will determine the fate of your entire species?" Jin-Ho stepped onto the platform. His voice felt small in the huge chamber, but he spoke clearly. "I understand. The rules are thus. You will face 5 challenges, each against one of our greatest minds. You must demonstrate intellectual superiority in at least one challenge to achieve victory for your species. Failure in all 5 challenges will result in permanent servitude for humanity. Do you accept these terms?" "I accept." High Evaluator Nexrim gestured to the first station. "Your first challenge is multi-dimensional strategy against Grand Strategist, Velmoth. You will compete in a game that tests your ability to think tactically across multiple variables and time periods." Grand Strategist Velmoth stepped forward. She was taller than most Vextar and moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a strategic contest. Her station contained a complex 3-dimensional display showing what looked like a battlefield with thousands of moving pieces. "The game is called Infinite Chess," she explained through the translator. "It is played on multiple boards simultaneously with pieces that can move between dimensions. Victory requires controlling the majority of dimensional nexus points while preventing your opponent from achieving the same goal." Jin-Ho looked at the display and felt overwhelmed. The game was incredibly complex, with rules that would take a human hours just to understand. But he had expected this. The Vextar always started with demonstrations of their superior knowledge and technology. "I need a moment to understand the rules," Jin-Ho said. Grand Strategist Velmoth made a sound that might have been laughter. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Jin-Ho spent 10 minutes studying the game, asking questions about how pieces moved and how victory was determined. But while he was learning the rules, he was also doing something else. He was studying Grand Strategist Velmoth. The Vextar champion was supremely confident. She answered his questions with barely concealed impatience, clearly believing that no human could master a game that Vextar strategists spent decades learning. More importantly, she was already planning her moves, organizing her strategy based on the assumption that Jinho would play the game the way it was supposed to be played. When the game began, Jinho did exactly what Grand Strategist Velmoth expected. He made careful, logical moves, trying to learn the deeper strategy while playing. For the first 20 moves, he fell behind steadily as the Vextar champion demonstrated her superior understanding of the game. But then Jinho did something that no previous challenger had ever done. Instead of trying to win through superior strategy, he began playing for chaos. Every move Jinho made was designed not to achieve victory, but to create unpredictable situations that forced Grand Strategist Velmoth to constantly recalculate her strategy. He sacrificed important pieces to create unexpected threats. He ignored obvious tactical advantages to pursue moves that made no immediate sense. Grand Strategist Velmoth began to show signs of frustration. Her moves became more aggressive as she tried to punish Jinho's apparently foolish strategy. But every time she thought she had gained a decisive advantage, Jinho's seemingly random moves created new complications. The key to Jinho's strategy was something he had learned from Dr. Heiwan. When you can't win by being better, you win by changing the game. Instead of playing infinite chess, he was playing infinite chaos. And Grand Strategist Velmoth didn't know how to respond to a game she had never encountered before. After an hour of play, something unprecedented happened. Grand Strategist Velmoth made an error. In her frustration with Jinho's unpredictable moves, she moved a key piece into a position that looked advantageous, but actually left her main nexus point vulnerable. Jinho immediately saw the opportunity and took it. In 3 quick moves, he captured the nexus point and achieved victory. The arena was completely silent. Grand Strategist Velmoth stared at the display as if she couldn't believe what had happened. High Evaluator Nexrim's expression was unreadable. Victory. To the challenger in the first contest, High Evaluator Nexrim announced. The score is 1 victory for humanity, 0 victories for the Vextar. A wave of musical sounds swept through the arena as thousands of Vextar reacted to something they had never seen before, a defeat of one of their champions. Jinho felt a surge of excitement, but he tried not to show it. He had won the first challenge, which meant humanity was safe no matter what happened next. But he had 4 more challenges to face, and now the Vextar knew he was more dangerous than they had expected. High Evaluator Nexrim gestured to the second station. Your next challenge is quantum logic against Master Logician Kexdar. You will solve mathematical proofs that test the limits of logical reasoning. Master Logician Kexdar stepped forward with obvious confidence, but Jinho noticed that the alien was studying him more carefully than Grand Strategist Velmoth had. The first victory had gotten their attention. The second station contained displays, showing complex mathematical equations and logical proofs. Some used symbols that Jinho had never seen before, representing mathematical concepts that humans hadn't discovered yet. You will be given 5 quantum logic puzzles, Master Logician Kexdar explained. Each puzzle has 1 correct solution that can be reached through pure logical reasoning. You must solve at least 3 puzzles correctly to achieve victory. Jinho looked at the first puzzle and felt his heart sink. It was far beyond anything he had learned in school. The mathematics involved concepts that would challenge human university professors. But as he studied the puzzle more carefully, Jinho realized something important. The puzzles weren't just tests of mathematical knowledge. They were tests of logical thinking. And logical thinking was something that could be approached from many different angles. Instead of trying to solve the puzzles the way Master Logician Kexdar expected, Jinho began to look for patterns and shortcuts. He ignored the complex mathematical proofs and focused on the underlying logical structures. For the first puzzle, Instead of working through the formal mathematical proof, Jin-Ho found a way to test the logical consistency of different answers by using simple examples. For the second puzzle, he used intuitive reasoning to guess the answer and then worked backward to verify it. Master Logician Kexdar watched with growing confusion as Jin-Ho solved puzzle after puzzle using methods that had nothing to do with formal mathematical training. The alien was clearly superior in mathematical knowledge, but Jin-Ho was thinking about the problems in ways that the alien had never considered. By the time Jin-Ho solved the third puzzle, Master Logician Kexdar was making rapid clicking sounds that indicated extreme agitation. The alien solved the remaining puzzles much faster than Jin-Ho, but it was too late. Victory to the challenger in the second contest, High Evaluator Nexrim announced. The score is 2 victories for humanity, 0 victories for the Vextar. The sounds from the arena were louder now, and Jin-Ho could hear what sounded like arguments breaking out among the Vextar observers. This wasn't supposed to be happening. Jin-Ho tried to stay calm, but inside he was amazed. He had won 2 challenges against beings who were supposed to be intellectually superior to any human. But he knew the next 3 challenges would be even harder, because now the Vextar understood that he was not going to fight fair. The arena fell completely silent as High Evaluator Nexrim called for a recess. Jin-Ho could see groups of Vextar in heated discussion, their musical conversations creating a strange harmony throughout the chamber. 2 consecutive losses were unprecedented in their recorded history. Jin-Ho was escorted to a small waiting area where Kelvin brought him water and food. The young technician's large eyes were wider than usual. Jin-Ho, what you have accomplished is extraordinary. No species has ever achieved victory in even one challenge of the Great Convergence. It's not over yet, Jin-Ho replied, trying to stay focused. They know I'm not going to play by their rules now. The next challenges will be harder. The Vextar Council is debating whether to modify the remaining challenges. Some argue that your methods are not true demonstrations of intelligence. Jin-Ho felt a spike of worry. Can they change the rules in the middle of the contest? The ancient laws are very specific. The challenges cannot be altered once the Great Convergence has begun. However, the remaining champions will certainly adapt their strategies. When the recess ended, the atmosphere in the arena was different. The Vextar observers were no longer casually confident. Many were leaning forward in their seats, studying Jin-Ho with intense interest. High Evaluator Nexrim gestured to the third station. Your next challenge is telepathic pattern recognition against Mind Reader Texelin. You will attempt to predict and counter the thoughts and strategies of a being who can perceive your mental processes. Mind Reader Texelin stepped forward, and Jin-Ho immediately felt uncomfortable. This Vextar was different from the others. Where most aliens seemed to look at him, Texelin seemed to look through him, as if reading the thoughts in his head. The challenge is simple, Texelin explained, her translated voice carrying an unsettling confidence. We will play a game of prediction and counter-prediction. I will attempt to anticipate your moves while you attempt to anticipate mine. Victory goes to whoever can successfully predict their opponent's actions more accurately. The third station contained a complex interface with hundreds of buttons, switches, and displays. Jin-Ho realized that this challenge would test not just intelligence, but also the ability to think in ways that couldn't be predicted. However, Texelin continued, I should mention that I can perceive the surface thoughts of any being within range. Your strategies and intentions are visible to me as clearly as if you spoke them aloud. Jin-Ho felt his stomach drop. How could he possibly win against someone who could read his mind? But as he thought about it, he remembered something important that Kelvin had taught him about human psychology. Human minds didn't work the same way as Vextar minds. Humans could think about multiple things at once, could hold contradictory ideas, could even deliberately confuse themselves. Maybe that was the key. When the challenge began, Jin-Ho did something that surprised Texelin. Instead of trying to hide his thoughts, he deliberately filled his mind with chaos. He thought about children's songs from his home world while simultaneously doing math problems in his head. He remembered conversations with his parents while planning his next move. He imagined himself as a bird flying through space while calculating chess strategies. Texelin's confident expression began to change. Your thought patterns are unusual. There is too much simultaneous activity to isolate strategic intent. Jin-Ho increased the mental chaos. He began thinking in different languages, mixing Korean with the English and Vextar words he had learned. He remembered every song he had ever heard while trying to solve the logic puzzles from earlier challenges. He imagined entire conversations with fictional characters while planning his actual moves. "This is unprecedented," Texelin said, her voice showing frustration for the first time. "Human minds appear to be naturally chaotic. I cannot distinguish between relevant and irrelevant thoughts." But Jin-Ho was doing more than just creating mental noise. Deep beneath the surface chaos, he was using pure intuition to make his moves. He wasn't thinking about strategy at all. He was just feeling what moves seemed right and trusting his instincts. Texelin became increasingly frustrated as the challenge continued. She was clearly the superior telepathic mind, but her abilities were useless against an opponent whose thoughts were too chaotic to read and whose moves were based on feelings rather than logic. After 30 minutes of the strangest mental duel, in Vexitar history, Jin-Ho achieved victory by successfully predicting Texelin's moves while she failed to predict his. Victory to the challenger in the third contest, High Evaluator Nexrim announced, his voice now carrying a tone of genuine uncertainty. The score is 3 victories for humanity, 0 victories for the Vextar. The arena erupted in confused musical discussions. Many Vextar were standing now, their usual organized behavior disrupted by the impossible events they were witnessing. Jin-Ho felt a mixture of excitement and exhaustion. 3 victories meant humanity was not just safe. They had achieved protected status. But he still had 2 more challenges to face, and he could see that the remaining champions were studying him with new respect and wariness. High Evaluator Nexrim gestured to the 4th station. "Your next challenge is technological innovation against Chief Engineer Rexmol. You will demonstrate your ability to solve complex engineering problems using available resources." Chief Engineer Rexmol approached the station with obvious determination. This Vextar was broader than the others, with hands that showed the wear of someone who worked with tools and machines. Unlike the previous champions, Rexmol didn't seem frustrated by Jin-Ho's victories. He seemed curious. "The challenge is to design a solution to a specific engineering problem," Rexmol explained. "You will be given a scenario and access to a database of available materials and technologies. The most efficient and effective solution wins." The 4th station contained holographic displays showing complex technical diagrams and databases of materials with properties that Jin-Ho didn't recognize. The engineering problem was to design a system for providing clean water to a colony on a planet with toxic soil and contaminated groundwater. Jin-Ho studied the problem and felt overwhelmed. Again. The Vextar had access to technologies that were thousands of years ahead of human engineering. Rexmol could probably design solutions that would seem like magic to human scientists. But as Jin-Ho looked at the problem more carefully, he began to think about it differently. Instead of trying to create the most advanced solution, what if he created the most practical one? While Rexmol designed an elegant system using advanced materials and complex energy sources, Jin-Ho designed something that looked crude by comparison. His solution used simple, abundant materials arranged in redundant systems. It wasn't as efficient as Rexmol's design, but it was modular, easy to repair, and didn't require rare resources or specialized knowledge to maintain. "Your solution is primitive," Rexmol observed as they presented their designs. "My system is far more efficient and requires fewer resources." "Your system is better," Jin-Ho agreed. "But what happens when it breaks down?" What happens if the colony doesn't have replacement parts for your advanced components? What happens if the people using it don't understand how it works? Rexmall paused, clearly not having considered these questions. Jin Ho continued. My system might not be as good, but anyone can fix it with basic tools. If part of it fails, the rest keeps working. It uses materials that can be found almost anywhere. It's not the best solution for today. It's the best solution for the next 100 years. The judging committee of Vextar engineers studied both designs carefully. After a long discussion, they reached a decision that surprised everyone. Victory to the challenger in the fourth contest, High Evaluator Nexrim announced. The human solution demonstrates superior understanding of long-term sustainability and adaptive design principles. Jin Ho had now won 4 out of 5 challenges. The impossible had become inevitable, but there was still one more challenge to face, and it would be against High Evaluator Nexrim himself. The arena was in chaos now. Thousands of Vextar were engaged in animated discussions, their carefully organized society shaken by the complete reversal of everything they had believed about their own superiority. High Evaluator Nexrim approached the 5th station with an expression that Jin Ho couldn't read. This final challenge would determine not just the outcome of the Great Convergence, but possibly the future relationship between humans and Vextar. Your final challenge is pure mathematics against myself, High Evaluator Nexrim announced. This should be our greatest advantage. The realm of absolute logic and calculation, where cleverness and creativity cannot substitute for true intellectual power. Jin Ho nodded, but inside he was smiling. High Evaluator Nexrim had just made a critical error. He had told Jin Ho exactly what he expected the challenge to be about. The most dangerous assumption anyone could make about a human was that they would fight the battle you were prepared for. The final challenge was about to begin, and Jin Ho had one last surprise for the aliens who thought they understood how intelligence worked. High Evaluator Nexrim stood at the 5th station with the confidence of someone who had never been intellectually challenged. The station contained the most advanced mathematical computation systems on the ship, capable of processing equations that would take human computers years to solve. Pure mathematics is the foundation of all intelligence, Nexrim declared to the arena. It cannot be influenced by emotion, creativity, or unconventional thinking. It is absolute truth expressed in logical relationships. Jin Ho approached the station knowing that this was his most dangerous challenge. Mathematics was the one area where Vexitar superiority was most absolute. They had thousands of years of advanced mathematical knowledge, and their minds were naturally suited to complex calculations. But Jin Ho had spent the previous challenges learning something important about the Vextar. They always fought the battles they were best at, using the weapons they were most comfortable with. They never considered that their opponents might change the battlefield entirely. The challenge is simple, Nexrim continued. We will each be given a series of mathematical problems of increasing complexity. Whoever solves the most problems correctly wins. The first problems appeared on the holographic displays. They were complex, but still within the range of advanced human mathematics. Jin Ho solved them quickly, matching Nexrim's pace. But as the problems became more difficult, Jin Ho began to fall behind. The mathematics involved concepts that humans hadn't discovered yet, using symbols and relationships that were completely foreign to him. The arena watched as High Evaluator Nexrim pulled ahead, solving problem after problem with mechanical precision. It seemed like the inevitable Vextar victory was finally at hand. But while Nexrim focused on solving the mathematical problems, Jin Ho was doing something else entirely. He was studying the patterns in the equations themselves, looking for hidden relationships that went beyond their mathematical meaning. Throughout the previous challenges, Jin Ho had been secretly introducing small mathematical constants into his responses, numbers that looked like normal parts of his calculations, but were actually something much more sophisticated. These numbers were designed to replicate and modify themselves when processed by Vextar computer systems. Jinho had learned about this technique from Min Jung, the human computer programmer. If you can hide a program inside normal-looking data, she had told him, you can make any computer system do things it was never supposed to do. Now, as the mathematical challenge continued, Jinho began to activate his hidden program. Every calculation he entered, every equation he solved, contained these viral mathematical constants. The Vextar computers, designed to process mathematical data at incredible speeds, were automatically analyzing and integrating Jinho's responses into their central database. High Evaluator Nexrim was so focused on demonstrating his mathematical superiority that he didn't notice what was happening to the ship's computer systems. The viral equations were spreading through the network, quietly modifying access protocols and administrative controls. I must commend your effort, Nexrim said as he solved the 20th problem while Jinho had only solved 15. However, as expected, pure mathematical ability favors the more advanced species. Jinho smiled and solved another problem, inserting another piece of his hidden program into the ship's systems. You know, High Evaluator, you're absolutely right about mathematics being absolute truth. Indeed, mathematics cannot lie or be manipulated by clever tactics. That's what makes it so useful, Jinho said, entering his final equation into the system. As he did, the last piece of his program activated. Suddenly, every display in the arena began showing new information. Instead of mathematical problems, they showed the administrative controls for the ship's central computer systems. And according to those displays, the new system administrator with full access privileges was listed as Jinho Human Challenger, High Evaluator. Nexrim stared at the displays in shock. What have you done? I've won, Jinho said simply. Not by solving more math problems than you, but by solving a different problem entirely. I figured out how to take control of your computer systems using nothing but the mathematical equations you were so confident would prove your superiority. The arena erupted in chaos as thousands of Vextar realized what had happened. A 12-year-old human had hacked their most advanced computer systems using mathematical concepts hidden in plain sight. High Evaluator Nexrim made rapid clicking sounds, clearly trying to communicate with the ship's computer systems to regain control. But Jinho's viral program had been designed to replicate and spread faster than any countermeasures could stop it. This is impossible, Nexrim said, his usual calm demeanor cracking. You have violated the fundamental principles of the mathematical challenge. Have I? Jinho asked, his voice carrying throughout the silent arena. You said this challenge was about pure mathematics. Everything I did was mathematically valid. I just used mathematics to solve a problem you didn't know existed, Innaho. Stood up and walked to the center of the platform. From there, he could see thousands of Vextar faces staring at him in shock and confusion. These beings who had dominated the galaxy for 10,000 years had never encountered anything like what they had just witnessed. I want to show you something, Jinho announced, activating the arena's main display system through his new administrative access. The screens around the arena lit up with images from throughout the ship. Humans in holding cells, Vextar working at their stations, the vast corridors and chambers of the massive vessel. You see all of this as proof of your superiority, Jinho continued. Your advanced technology, your organized society, your logical thinking, and you are superior in all those ways. But there's something you don't understand about intelligence. Jinho changed the display to show the records of the Great Convergence challenges. For 10,000 years, you've tested other species by making them compete on your terms, using your methods, solving your problems. When they failed, you concluded they were inferior. But what if the problem wasn't their intelligence? What if the problem was that intelligence comes in different forms? The arena remained silent, but Jin-Ho could see that many Vextar were listening intently. Grand Strategist Velmoth is brilliant at strategy, but she couldn't handle unpredictability. Master Logician Kexdar is amazing at formal mathematics, but he couldn't adapt to intuitive problem-solving. Mind Reader Texlin can read thoughts perfectly, but she can't understand a mind that thinks in chaos. Chief Engineer Rexmol can design incredible technology, but he never considered what happens when perfect technology meets imperfect reality. Jin-Ho gestured to High Evaluator Nexrim. And you can process mathematical relationships faster than any human computer, but you never imagined that mathematics could be used as a weapon. The displays changed again, showing comparative data about human and Vextar problem-solving approaches. You think intelligence is about being right. Humans think intelligence is about adapting. You solve problems by applying superior knowledge. Humans solve problems by changing the problem. High Evaluator Nexrim stepped forward. What is your point, human Jin-Ho? My point is that you've been wrong about everything. You think you're collecting inferior species to serve you, but what you're actually doing is eliminating the diversity that makes intelligence powerful. Every species you've conquered or destroyed had different ways of thinking that could have made you stronger. Jin-Ho activated another display showing the scope of the Vextar fleet and their galactic territories. You rule a huge part of the galaxy, but you're stagnant. You haven't had a major technological breakthrough in thousands of years. You haven't encountered a problem you couldn't solve with existing methods. You've become so good at being Vextar that you've forgotten how to be anything else. The arena was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the ship's systems seemed muted. I'm not just winning this contest for humanity, Jin-Ho said. I'm offering you something you've never had before, a chance to learn from a species that thinks differently than you do. Jin-Ho brought up the administrative controls for the ship's communication systems. I could broadcast a signal to every human colony, warning them about your fleet. I could send the technical specifications of your ships to human scientists. I could even try to disable your weapons and engines. High Evaluator Nexrim tensed, clearly preparing to call for emergency measures. But I'm not going to do any of that, Jin-Ho continued. Instead, I'm going to do something that no previous challenger could have done. I'm going to offer you a partnership. The words seemed to confuse many of the Vextar. Their translator systems struggled to find an equivalent concept in their language. Humans don't win by being superior, Jin-Ho explained. We win by adapting, by learning, by working together with others who think differently than we do. Your logical thinking combined with human creativity could solve problems that neither of us could handle alone. Jin-Ho gestured to the displays showing human colonies throughout the galaxy. You could study us as partners instead of specimens. You could learn our methods while we learn yours. You could discover what 10,000 years of unchallenged supremacy has cost you.